the biggest rat on the planet. It will, if you know what you're looking for, you'll be able to determine what happened.
So, Sergeant, sorry, still getting used to that one. Sergeant, in terms of the time of arrival on scene, is crime scene there before the medical examiner's office?
Yes.
Okay. So when you are first looking and determining whether or not a death is suspicious, you're the first person looking at that body?
Correct.
So could you explain to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what that Principles of Death Investigation class taught you briefly?
So it would teach us if we're dealing with an overdose, what to look for when we're dealing with an overdose. It teach us if it's what to look for with, if there's gunshot wounds, what to look for if you have what looks to be nothing. You just have a body there and 23-year-old male who just died. Teaches us what to look for. So we're looking for petechia hemorrhaging, which is what you'll see in the eyes, which are little blood vessels that are throughout your whole entire body. And if they are squeezed, if you have a particular squeeze, you'll see petechia hemorrhaging in the eyes. You'll see it on the bottom of the eyelids. You also see it in the chest quite often. In an area where there's trauma of strangulation, you'll see lots of petechia hemorrhaging. So that's just some of what we're looking for when we're making our determination on what actually happened with this with the decedent.
During the death investigation course, does it give you a general idea of how to collect evidence on those cases?
Yes.
Do you also have training in specific crime scene investigations and collection of evidence?
Yes.
About how many hours?
Well, that was 40 hours also.
Okay. And in terms of your day-to-day job when you were in crime scene, how much of your time was spent actually collecting, documenting, and preserving evidence?
So we are quite busy in Broward County. There's only 12 of us, and we have, like I said, 17 cities to serve, and our MOU cities. So roughly 1 or 2 a day.
So would that be half of your time?
Yes.
You talked a little bit about shooting reconstruction courses that you took. Can you tell the ladies and gentlemen a little bit about what is an approach angle or an angle of entry?
An angle of entry would be from a projectile or a bullet into a target. So it's the flight path, if you will, as it's going in. That flight path would then once it makes its contact with its target, we would then be able to determine its angle of entry.
And is that similar to some of the things you do in the traffic crash reconstruction with approach angles of cars hitting one another?
Yes, so approach angles would also apply to traffic crash investigations. It's a little different. It's the same math, but essentially if you have a car that T-bones another car, one car is going 80 and the other car is going 40, what happens is due to physics and velocity, they end up switching speeds, and the 40-mile-an-hour car goes faster and the 80-mile-an-hour car goes slower. So those are part of approach angles, and that's how we would be able to determine pre-crash speed and post-crash speed. So a lot of times you'll see that you'll have a higher speed from the original and a lower speed from the original, and it throws people off sometimes.
So does this also help with the shooting reconstruction? You're using that same angle math?
Yes.
Have you taken classes in blood stain pattern analysis?
Yes.
Can you explain what that is first?
So blood is a unique liquid. It contains, it's unlike any liquid on the planet, so it has unique features when it is altered. So when it's outside of the body and contact is made with it, it will create a pattern. Or if you have, say, a knife and you stab it into somebody and you pull that knife out, the knife naturally will have blood on it, and that blood coming back on the knife, with the knife coming in the backwards position, will come off of the blade and it will make a stain. Or if you take blood and hit it with a hammer, it will make a different type of stain. So there's several types of stains that are associated with blood stain, and those all need to be interpreted to determine exactly what happened, and in some cases it can tell you where the assailant was.
Okay. In terms of blood stain pattern analysis, how long was that class that you took?
40 hours.
Did they have a discussion about what is blowback?
Yes.
What is that?
So blowback is very simple. The easiest way that I can explain it is, and everybody in this courtroom, this has happened to them, you have your garden hose with the big nozzle on it, and you're getting ready to wash the car, and you hit the rim, and what happens? The water comes right back at you and hits you in the face. The same thing would happen with blowback. So if you're in close vicinity with a firearm and you shoot somebody, depending on where you shoot them at on their body, the blood will come back in that same direction of the velocity that it came from. So if it came from me to you, if the bullet went from me to you, the blood is going to come from you to me. Same thing as the garden hose theory. It's a phenomenon that happens. It's all with Newton. Newton figured it all out, and he was very right, and you can't ever escape it.
So with regards to that, if you shoot a dead body, do you have the same blowback pattern?
No, you will not.
Why not?
So a dead body, it does not have any circulation. So there's no blood flowing through the body. Post-mortem, once you're dead, what happens is we get what's called rigor mortis, which is also called lividity. And what that is pooling of the blood. So if you die on your back, almost immediately the blood starts to pool all the way to your back. So all the blood will just kind of, gravity brings it all the way down to your back. Eventually it will become fixed and it will stay there. So if we roll you over, it will not go back in that other direction. If it's not yet fixed, we can flip the body over, and the blood will then flow the other way again.
Is that something that would help determine an approximate time of death?
Yes, so lividity starts to kick in anywhere between 4 to 6 hours after death. It will become fixed approximately 18 hours after death. So generally when we come in contact with a body, we will check for lividity. You see that my hand was red because there's
Specific case. Did you make any promises as to the outcome of your...
may I stand?
Please, if you would, yes.
So if you use a protractor, and obviously a vehicle is angled, it's aerodynamic, so some of it comes out like this, some cars like that. If you use a protractor, and obviously a protractor has to be flat, you're going to get an incorrect angle. So I use geometry to create a right triangle, which would then give me the actual angle of each site mark.
So, Sergeant, are you telling me that you use the Pythagorean theorem in your day-to-day work?
Yes.
I think I owe an apology to my high school geometry. Okay, so talking about that, is that a squared plus b squared equals c squared?
Yes.
And what does that tell you?
That tells me an angle. So obviously you have, it has to equal 180 degrees. We start off always at 90, and then we would work our way to determining that angle.
Are you looking at more than one angle on each of these particular entrance defects?
There are different angles for each site mark.
Are you looking at the vertical angle?
These are all going to be horizontal angles.
Okay. And when you say we're using
Vertical angles, yes.
And so we're using a poster board and a knitting needle help demonstrate the different types of angles that you're measuring on that.
A knitting angle, needle?
That's what I had.
Okay, yeah, that'll work.
Okay. Here, let's say it would be using a demonstrative exhibit here.
Thank you. Again, ladies and gentlemen, the witness is using a demonstrative exhibit to assist in explaining and illustrating his testimony. The evidence is the testimony of the witness. The demonstratives, unless they are later received in evidence, are not in evidence and do not go back to the jury room during your deliberations.
Okay, so joint counsel has been marked as A, B, and C. We need to move on.
You're going to be facing it that way.
Facing out. So starting with what this demonstrative is on strike mark A. If you, to illustrate, if you show the ladies and gentlemen of the jury how you would insert a trajectory rod if you were trying to do the trajectory of strike mark A, and we're going to hold it at a 90-degree angle.
So naturally, just to put a disclaimer here, this is only one hole. So I would need a second hole to complete this. However, you would start with the inserting the trajectory rod, and you would follow. You don't just shove it in. You actually gently follow the flight path of the projectile until it reaches terminal, and then you stop.
So if you could explain to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury when you're looking at the vertical angle, what part of it are you measuring?
So I would measure from the ground to the actual strike mark. That would be a measurement that I would need. The ground to the tip of the rod, and then the length of the rod that is sticking out from the projectile hole. That all gets put into fancy math, and it produces an angle.
And so the angle that you are measuring, if you could just show with your finger what angle you're trying to figure out.
Trying to get the trajectory angle, the flight path of the projectile.
So is that side to side or top to bottom?
That's going to be from top to bottom.
Okay. So that on strike mark A, does this illustrate a practically 90 degree?
Yes.
Okay. Moving on to strike mark B here. Would you use the same math on this particular type of trajectory entrance or exit?
Yes.
Okay. And so when you're talking about the vertical angle here, what area are you looking at and measuring?
The same one. So we'll go from the ground to the strike mark, the ground to the tip of the rod, and then from the strike mark entry to the end of the rod for the length of the rod.
And in terms of the side-to-side angle, or azimuth as it's sometimes referred to, is this again at a 90 degrees to the side of this piece of poster board?
Yes.
Moving on to strike mark C. How would you do the same trajectory analysis on strike mark C?
Strike mark C would be very similar with we would want to know that the entrance or the ground to the strike mark the ground to the tip of the rod, but then we would have to get a horizontal distance and use the I'm trying to remember offhand. The side of the wall to the tip of the rod.
So you're then getting the azimuth or the entry angle on the
Correct.
side to side.
Correct.
Okay. In terms of the math and everything else, you're making the same right triangle every time.
Yes.
Okay. So, what you're doing with these trajectory rods, is this repeatable?
Yes.
Can someone come back and check your work?
Yes.
In terms of the projectiles in this case.
Drive-by shooting.
So I want to go, and in terms of, you mentioned that there was, if you found a projectile or you thought there should be a projectile somewhere, you would stop and look for it.
Yes.
Can you explain if that happened in this case?
It did.
Okay, and so I want to go forward and go to some of your photos from the recovery of projectiles. Did you recover projectiles in this case?
2 projectiles were recovered from this vehicle.
And where were they recovered from?
The first projectile was recovered from underneath the back seat,
Okay.
and the second projectile was recovered on the passenger side interior B pillar.
Okay, so I'm going to go forward and show the jury what's been labeled as CSW_677. What are we looking at here in this photo?
May I stand?
Please. And there's actually a red rod right next to you that if you want to point with that.
Right here is a projectile. Right here. That was recovered from the seat. So the seat was actually lifted up, and that projectile was recovered from underneath the seat.
And so when you're saying underneath the seat, what seat are you talking about?
The back seat.
Did you have to remove the seat to get to that projectile?
I did.
Okay, and then CSW6778. Is that another view of that same projectile?
Correct.
So you mentioned there was an additional projectile recovered from this car, and you said the B pillar?
The passenger side B pillar interior.
And so if you could orient the ladies and gentlemen of the jury in what we're looking at in photo CSW6772. What area of the car are we looking at?
This is the passenger side interior B pillar.
Okay, and so if you could explain where the front seat passenger would be in relation to this photo. Right?
Can you blow it up?
Sure. Actually,
guess
Detective,
not.
or
Okay.
Sergeant, sorry, I think council needs to approach.
We need a short recess, ladies and gentlemen. Do not discuss the case, don't form any opinion about the case, don't allow anyone to discuss the case in present. So no recess. Just give me some take on that. Thank you. Let the record reflect the jury step down. Councilman Manuel, the defendant. Mr. Devens, you need a restroom break? Yes. All right. You will raise that hand? Yep. Thank you. Jury entry. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Please be seated. Let the record once again reflect the presence of the defendant, his counsel, the assistant state attorney, and the ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Our witness, Sergeant Williams, remains on stand. If you're ready to proceed with your direct counsel, you may.
Thank you. Okay, Sergeant, so I'm going through some of the photos, and here we have the first photo that you took in this case. What were you documenting?
This is documenting the vehicle as it initially came to me, with the plastic wrap around the window that was broken out, and showing the tag as well.
Okay, and is this the vehicle that you did the analysis on?
Yes,
And what tag from the state of Florida was assigned?
that is the tag IEKD22.
Excuse me, could we get the date? I did not recall the date that this was done.
Sure, no problem. Sergeant, were these photos from the initial evaluation of the Jeep?
December 17th, 2021.
And so based on that, when was the initial date you were contacted by myself to review this?
November 16, 2021.
Okay. So if there's anything you need to refer to your report, just let us know so you can refresh your recollection.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So you said December 17th, 2021, sorry.
Yes,
Okay. And did you document the evidence tape and the seals on this car?
I did.
Going on to the side view of the vehicle, what are we looking at here?
This is the side of the vehicle that has defects in it, and
I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Are these letters things you put on there?
these letters were placed by the Miramar Police Department.
When you continued with your trajectory and shooting Reconstruction, did you maintain the same letters when referring to the various defects?
I assumed these letters.
Okay. And so if we can just describe for the record the locations of each of these letters on this vehicle, starting with I.
I would be in the passenger side rear door panel, exterior panel.
Okay. J,
Same,
K,
same,
L,
same,
M.
same.
Okay, moving on to N, O, and P.
These projectiles site marks are on the passenger side front door exterior.
And again, in this next photo, what are you documenting?
These are the seals.
So going around to the seals have now been broken, what are you documenting in this photo?
This would be the driver's side rear door that is ajar, with a photograph showing the door ajar and the compartment area of that passenger side.
Okay. So in continuing, down here in the floor, there's another object with a blue piece of foam in it. What is that?
That would be the glove box of the vehicle.
Why is the glove box in the back seat?
The glove box had to be removed to remove the infotainment center of the vehicle.
And in terms of on the far side door, that doesn't look like the inside of any car door I've seen. Why is there pieces of it missing?
Can you zoom?
Sure. So all the black plastic's been removed? from
Correct.
the passenger
So that was removed for a footwear examination that was done on the vehicle.
There's some gray substance here. Can you describe to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what happens to blood after it sits for 5 years?
Blood begins to break down after time, and actually it has bacteria, or if you will, has organisms that begin to break it down. DNA is in there, obviously, so it actually begins to eat itself, if you will, and that's essentially what is left behind.
And so going forward now through the photographs, I want to get to some of the ones with the individuals in the Tyvek Smurf suits. Starting here on 4851, what are you documenting in this particular image?
This is a photograph of the rear compartment or the back seat of the Jeep Compass, and it has a tape measure in it, and it's documenting the inside width of the vehicle.
Okay. And what was the inside width at shoulder height of the vehicle?
51 inches.
Why do you measure and document all of these measurements on the Jeep?
Well, this is a unique case because you have a shooting incident that occurred inside a vehicle. And because it did, we can use these measurements to determine particular investigative leads, such as where a shooter could be and a distance of the end of the barrel of the firearm. So because it's a compartmentalized area, unlike being out in the open field where we have so many variables, the variables are severely limited because it's inside a compartmentalized area.
And so we'll get into why you can make that determination just a little bit. I want to start in terms of the angles of impact for each of the strike marks on the outside of the car and on the back of the rear passenger seats. Did you do the angles of impact on each of those?
Yes.
Okay. So after the measurements in terms of the seats as well, here, what are you documenting in this photo, CSW 4855?
That would be the distance from the back seat back, if you will, where you put your back, to the back of the front seat.
And what was that distance determined to be?
39 inches.
And what are you showing in this photo?
That would be the other end of the tape measure.
So I want to go here on the ceiling, S1 with the arrow pointed to a cutout. Was that also related to a patent or a footwear impression?
Yes, so that cutout, prior to that cutout in the headliner, there was a footwear impression on the headliner that was examined.
Okay, in terms of this measurement here, what are you showing the distance from?
Showing the distance from the from the driver's side, rear passenger seat back to the passenger front seat, front of the
Is that the headrest?
headrest, yeah.
Okay. And then do you determine that measurement as well to the bottom of the seat?
Yes,
Okay. And what was that measurement?
39 inches.
And on the previous measurement, it was a similar?
39 inches.
So in terms of going forward in the reconstruction process, once you have put in all the trajectory rods and gotten the angles, what's the next step that you need to do?
here I continued my analysis of the vehicle. Because of the fact that I found the 2 projectiles, I wanted to ensure that anything else relevant to the investigation was collected, so I examined the vehicle further.
Okay, so I'm going to showing defense counsel what's been marked as states quadruple E for identification purposes only. Do you recognize the exhibits in states quadruple E?
I do.
And how do you recognize those?
That is my handwriting and my name on it, and it is sealed with red evidence tape with my initials and ID.
Did you collect those items?
I did.
What are they?
These are 2 projectiles that were recovered from the vehicle.
And are those the 2 that we viewed previously in the photographs?
We've only reviewed 1 in the photograph.
Just the one in the back, and then the other one you mentioned was recovered from what location?
From the driver's side, or sorry, passenger side B pillar
And
interior.
Show in this photo that's up here, and you can touch the screen in front of you as well, and it will put a little arrow as to where is the passenger side B pillar. Okay. And are those projectiles in the same or substantially same condition as when you recovered them?
Can I open them?
Please. Okay, scissors to be found.
They are.
Here at this time, the state would request to move state quadruple E in as 78.
Any objection?
No.
It'll be admitted.
States quadruple E will be marked states number 78.
So you mentioned that you did some additional searching on the car once you realized that there was other projectiles in there. Did you
Correct.
find any other items of evidentiary value?
I did.
And what would that be?
I observed what appeared to be blowback on the headliner of the vehicle.
And so if you could explain to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, where is the headliner on the vehicle?
It is above your head as you're seating in the car. It actually just is there for cosmetic purposes, so you don't see your roof.
So showing defense counsel what's been previously identified as state triple T. Sergeant, do you recognize state what's been marked for identification as state's triple T?
I do.
How do you recognize that item?
This is my handwriting, my name. It is sealed with red evidence tape with my initials and ID.
And what is that item?
This would be the headliner with the blowback on it that I cut out.
And do you recall on what date you cut that out?
That was cut out on December, may I just look at
Or does it
the
reflect on the packaging in any
Oh
way?
yes, 12/17 of 21.
And is that in the same or substantially same condition as when you recovered it?
Mayor,
Please. Gloves there if you need them.
yes it is, minus the testing that I did, a cutting, and a cutting that the lab did.
Here at this time, the state would request to move state triple T in as state 79.
Any objection?
No, sir.
It will be admitted.
And Detective, if you'd be so kind, I'm going to ask you to publish this particular item to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury.
States triple T has been marked states 79.
And Detective, if you could hold it up and show the back of it as well, and then indicate which part went to the front of the vehicle.
Do you have the picture of the headliner?
Sure. Nope, sorry. Would this photo help in assisting you in the location?
And I object to the leading nature of.
Will this assist you? Call the rule.
Yes.
Oh.
It would be so if the vehicle is facing this way, it would be this way.
Okay, and just show the ladies and gentlemen of the jury the back of it so that it understands. Okay. And in terms of what are you looking at on that piece of headliner? What does it show?
So it shows blood, and it also shows the directionality of the blood.
Okay. And if you could show on the picture that's in front of you on the screen what your area of the car you're talking about.
Is it okay to put this away?
Please, yes.
John, maybe please have our
Sure.
Detective, so in terms of the image that we're looking at here, can you show the ladies and gentlemen of the jury where that blowback pattern was?
It would be in. Is there a way to make it circle?
Would you like to draw?
Yes.
If I may.
It would be in this area right in here. It's a little bigger than I drew, but it's in this general area right here.
Okay. In terms of the information about that DNA, why is it important to know whose DNA that is?
Well, it's unusual to have the blowback on the headliner, so of course, and for this shooting incident, we would want to identify where that blood came from. So that's why it was sent to the lab to determine whose blood it was.
And was that determination made?
It was.
Okay. And whose blood was that?
That was the front seat passenger's blood.
In terms of the location and the pattern, what does that tell you about the orientation of the front seat passenger's head at the time of the shooting?
The front seat passenger's head was actually down almost as if he was sleeping, so it was down, leaning on the right at an angle. So his head was at an angle as he was seated in that front seat.
Would a demonstrative of the head help illustrate that point?
Sure.
Okay. I'm showing, was previously shown to the defense counsel, and used as a witness yesterday labeled as BMEO 18-3118 by Dr. McDougall.
Again, ladies and gentlemen, the witness will be using a demonstrative to assist in explaining or illustrating his testimony. Just remember that the testimony of the witness is the evidence. These demonstrative aids are not to be considered as evidence unless they're later received in evidence. Only items of evidence go back with you during deliberations for your further examination.
So Sergeant Williams, Dr. McDougall indicated on that particular head that entrance and exit wounds on that. Is that consistent with your review of the autopsy photographs and crime scene photographs in this case?
It is.
And based on your analysis of this vehicle, did you find any projectiles anywhere in the headliner?
No.
Did you find any projectiles in the top portion of the B pillar on the passenger side?
No.
What about the A pillar?
No.
Was there any projectiles in the front windshield?
No.
Based on your training and experience, can you state where the exit wound of that head had to have gone through? Where that projectile would have had to have exited that vehicle?
It would have exited through the front passenger window.
How can you say that?
Number one, there's no glass there. However, most importantly is the projectile entered in the back of his skull and exited through the front of his skull with his head at a resting angle. So, can I get up?
Please, that would help and assist in showing.
So this resting angle in this seat, you have the projectile coming in, exiting through the top of the skull, and then continuing through the windshield.
You said windshield.
The window.
Can you say that it was at the top of the window, or the bottom of the window, the middle of the window?
I cannot.
So based on that projectile and the blowback, you can make what opinions?
So based blowback is indicative of a firearm being in close vicinity of the head. The head is something that bleeds profusely when it's pierced. If you've ever fallen on stairs or hit your head, it bleeds like no tomorrow. And because the projectile entered in right below the skull, the blowback ended up coming in the direction of, as I was speaking earlier about the hose, in the direction that it came from. And you will get that with a very close shot. That blowback then proceeded after the shot. It went up, it hit this headliner, and continued and falling into the back seat.
And so I want to go to some of the other photos. There's a yellow jacket that's on the very back of the vehicle. Is it important to know whose DNA blood was found on that?
What yellow jacket?
Let me come back to that because I have the other photos, so we'll come back to
Okay.
that in a moment. Okay, so in terms of the location of the firearm that fired the shot, and we were just talking about in CSW 6745, does this attempt to accurately recreate the potential location of that firearm?
So the purpose of this photograph is strictly demonstrative to show where once the projectile enters into the head, you're going to have the blowback, which again will come up, strike the headliner, and then continue. It's actually continuing this way and landing back here behind the driver in this area of the vehicle.
In terms of the driver and the t-shirt that he was wearing, do you take into account the location of the victim's DNA on his shirt?
Well, based upon the blowback pattern up here, I would expect to find some blowback here if on a driver, if a driver was there.
So would you expect to find the DNA of Anthony Williams on the front of the driver's shirt?
Yes.
Okay. And were you made aware that that is the results that were in this case?
Later on, yes.
And in terms of how does that help with a check and balance on your work?
So that confirms my analysis with the blowback, that the blowback came back, went, like I said, went up. It's going to fall here, and then it's going to continue to fall into this back seat.
Okay, so I want to move on again, and you talked about like a wound that was close. Do you look for things like stippling in photographs?
Yes, so we'll look for stippling, and it's also referred to as tattooing.
Okay, and did you notice any of that powder tattooing in the photographs of the deceased Anthony Williams?
Yes, there was some there. However, due to the fact that Anthony Williams has an intermediate object, i.e., the head back. What do they call it?
Headrest.
The
Is that the
headrest.
word you're looking for? Okay.
Due to the headrest being there, that's an intermediate item. So the projectile was able to go into the into Anthony Williams. However, whenever you fire a gun, you have gunshot residue that's going to come out of the barrel and out of the ejection port. In this case, because of the position of Mr. Williams's head and the intermediate object of the headrest assumed most of the GSR, the gunshot residue, and then only some of it went into Mr. Williams.
Without a pattern, can you give any sort of a range of distance?
No, I cannot.
So, do you also look at ejection patterns for casings?
You can look at ejection patterns. I generally don't because it is a very strong variable. Semi-automatic firearms have springs, and depending on the age of the firearm, the springs will start to wear. The way the firearm is held will dictate where the cartridge is ejected. The spring will determine where the cartridge is ejected. If there's wind, that will have an effect. So it's not necessarily going to help with determining where, just doing any analysis on any ejection port, any ejection analysis from a firearm.
In terms of an enclosed space such as this, does that also make a difference?
It would, well, I would expect the cartridge to remain into the vehicle, and that's all I would expect for this.
In terms of the angle of the entry without the actual body, can you do that?
No.
Is it common practice to take a body and put it back in the car after autopsy?
It is not. However, it can be done if the body was in place upon scene. We can make a preliminary analysis there. I don't believe the Miramar Police Department had that opportunity. These individuals were brought right into the hospital, so that opportunity was lost.
Okay. In terms of the firearm itself, were you ever presented with a firearm that was said to be the one used in this case?
No.
So, we talked about the back spatter. On the medical examiner's report, did you review the medical examiner's report for the backseat passenger, Christopher Thomas?
I did.
Who was it that noticed a mislabeled entrance and exit wound?
I noticed that.
And what did you do when you realized that there was an issue or concern with the report?
I notified you that there was an issue, that a defect in Mr. Thomas was labeled twice.
Okay. And so what, after that was done, did you look through the photos from the hospital?
I did, because I observed that Mr. Thomas had a defect on his right quadricep area, the upper part of his leg, that came from the door, and it entered into the seat. And when I was looking at the autopsy photos of Mr. Thomas, I would expect to find an exit wound from the medical examiner's office, and they did not have a picture to produce that, and it wasn't annotated in their report. So again, I notified you of this discrepancy as well.
And in terms of, were you able to figure out and determine which projectile caused that specific injury based on your reconstruction?
I was.
So we talked a little bit about the shots to Anthony Williams. I want to move on and talk to any of the injuries to Christopher Thomas. What did you look at and review in trying to establish a shooting reconstruction of the injuries to Mr. Thomas?
So the rods from the rear of the vehicle, Mr. Thomas assumed most of his injuries from the rear of the vehicle. I believe 5 projectiles entered him from the rear of the vehicle. 1 projectile entered him on his quadricep, right quadricep.
Okay.
And I believe 2 projectiles entered him on his foot. And that's going from memory. Right, these autopsy photos, or?
So I'm going to come here to 6754, your photograph on that.
Okay, so these are the terminal points from the rear of the vehicle. Mr. Thomas is seated in this position, and of the 6 rounds that went into the seat, Mr. Thomas assumed 5 of them, and it is a very similar pattern in Mr. Thomas's back. It may not look like it lines up correctly, however.
Let me interrupt you just there for a second before we go. On the top photograph that is labeled and marked as H, did that wound intersect in any way with the body of Christopher Thomas?
No.
Where was that projectile or defect later found?
That projectile perforated that headrest and continued to go forward in the vehicle and ended up striking Mr. Williams and I believe his back.
Okay. So I want to go forward on the back of the car You take this picture, CSW underscore 6760. What are you showing with this particular photograph?
So these are the trajectory rods that have entered into the vehicle. They are not exactly at the correct angle. The reason being, obviously, there's no glass. So they perforated the glass first, and then they made a secondary perforation into the seats. So that's why they're not exactly level.
So, Sergeant, are you saying that the end of these rods is where those shots were fired from?
No,
Why not?
because I'm missing the glass. So the glass would, obviously, if I can take a rod and put it through the glass and then into the terminal point, I would be able to obtain this picture to be demonstrably correct.
Okay, in terms of the angles and things that you measured on these, how did you get those angle measurements?
So what I ended up doing is recreating the back glass based on putting tape across the entire back of the window and making it line up with the glass that's existing in place on the top, sides, and bottom, and lined it up with that to make the arch of the glass window, and then ended up putting these rods into the proper position, and then created by right angles to create the proper angles for these strike marks.
In terms of the location in which the gun was fired that created these defects in the car, can you say it was a certain distance away with specificity?
I can give a range for these shots and for the shots on the side of the vehicle.
And in terms of the range, are you saying it could be a mile away at a 50-foot ladder?
No, I can give a specific range.
And how can you do that in this case?
So the specific range is based upon the two shooters that were presented to me, and I would obtain measurements.
Objection, Your Honor.
Suggestion.
Go Sergeant.
Can we go separate? Sure.
Okay, Sergeant, you can answer that question.
Why don't you restate the question, Council?
So you were discussing that how you would find and determine angles and ranges for specific individuals that are presented to you.
Yes. Height, which would be standing with your arm out at 90 degrees. That height would be a 14 and a
Side.
with Christopher Thomas, because Christopher Thomas was already deceased when these rounds were coming into the back of the vehicle, because Christopher Thomas was what we would call crumbling. He was starting to fall, if you will. And on top of that, I know that he was already deceased because the back of the rounds are coming in.
Why is that important in your analysis? I'm going to go back to 4809 to describe those angles.
So these angles are important because it is part of my assignment, which is to determine if this is a drive-by shooting. Very good picture is done. The one round that all of these rounds should look like this.
Why?
Because movement is being introduced. Station. No.
Okay. In terms of the information as to about the Miramar. At some point, did you go out to a scene on Pembroke?
And I actually brought the vehicle, had the vehicle towed out there as well to the site that was determined by the Miramar Police Department. And I actually obtained different heights. Although I'm coming in 3 in the middle of his, nothing, the rear of it, and it identifies GSR as well. There's some right here, here, and here.